Alright, so last class we modeled our desk. Just this pretty small, basic IKEA looking thing. So let's start with starting out the chair today, I guess, is probably a good place to start. So let's do the same thing that we did last time, which is go to Chrome, and we're gonna find some sort of chair that we would like. So let's look up like office chair, or no, I'm just gonna look up wooden chair. Feel free to find whatever chair suits your personality. Alright, so this, I like that one. This one's kind of cool. So I like this chair. Just this image is super duper small. You can see the resolution of it is 280 by 280, which we can remember if we can turn on the size to large. Hopefully we'll find a bigger version of that. If not, what we can do is we can go back to it and we can click on right on the little number here. Let's just see if Google has anything larger. Alright, so 736. I'll be able to open this image up and kind of zoom in on it a little bit better than something that was 200 pixels big. So I'm going to go to my folder, go to my reference images folder, and I'm going to name this chair reference. Then we're going to open up that image. So again, at least, when we're starting out, it's good to have something to refer to, just like if you were going to be drawing something, chances are you would have like a reference photograph, or you might be like in a figure illustration, you'd have like a live object or model in front of you that you would be recreating. I like to follow that same process in 3D. So let's start out with this chair. Now we can start with the seat portion pretty simply with just a cube. So the first thing I'm going to do is I don't need this desk to be visible while I'm working on the chair. They're going to be separate objects. I don't necessarily need to refer to them at the same time. So I'm going to turn off the little traffic lights, which are these two gray little dots right here. So I'm going to click them until they each turn red, and then that will hide the desk. So now I'm able to make a cube and kind of start from scratch for the chair. So referring back to our image, the seat is a very short, wide rectangle, or rectangular cube kind of looking thing. So we can just shrink that by pulling on the orange handle there. A little bit more maybe. So it looks like a pretty good start for the seat. Actually, that might even be all that we need to do. Well, it's still going to have a seat and a back and arms. So we'll start from there. If your chair is different, that was what the question was, is what if you're doing an office chair that has wheels instead of legs? Well, the top half is going to be pretty much the same process, so we're going to start with that and go from there. So this is our chair, seat. Pretty simple. This is probably close enough where I'm going to move to the back now. So that's this portion that we lean on. So I'm just going to take a copy of this, and again we can copy it a couple different ways. You can do Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, or what I like to do is just hold Control and drag on one of our movement arrows, because I'm going to pull this back this way and then rotate it up a bit. And this is going to form the basis for the back of our chair. Now one thing to note is that this has a curved back. So what we have to do is we have to, with our object selected, now I'm going to name this chair back. So with our chair back selected, what we need to do is we need to add divisions kind of vertically this way so that we can create this curve. Sort of like if you're looking at the grain on this wood here, we need to make sort of vertical divisions. And so what we can do is on our segments here, we can figure out which one of these directions we want to add segments to. And I believe it's going to be the X. Yep. So it's the X direction. Now, if you are adding segments and you aren't seeing these lines appear, what you want to do is make sure if you click on display here above the viewport that you are on the second mode, which is lines mode. So that way these divisions will be visible to you. Now I think, so display here at the top, and it's the second one. Oh, how to add them? Yeah. So with the chair back selected, by default, these three values, segment X, segment Y, segment Z, are all 1, but that's not good. We want to figure out which one of these directions we want to add divisions to, and in my case, it is the X direction. Your chair might be shaped differently, so yours might curve. If I jump back to Google real quick, see if we can find an example of what I'm talking about. So like this chair, you see how this curves differently? The curve on this, you would be adding your segments in a different, you wouldn't pick X, you would probably be picking a different either Y or Z, for example. So you just want to you want to examine which way your chair curves, and then using the display line mode, you want to make sure that you're matching that when you are adding your segments. So we have these segments, but this isn't curved actually. We can see this is still perfectly flat. So what we want to do is now we need to make this object editable. And does anyone remember the hotkey for that? To make an object editable?
C.
C, yep. So C, again, the button is right here on the top left if you want to click it instead, but I'm going to hit C on my keyboard. So now that my object is editable, and we can double check that because this little icon right here is no longer a cube. It is the little triangle shape which represents a polygon. It means that we can now edit this ourselves. So on Tuesday when we were making the desk, we spent a lot of time using the polygon selection mode. Today we're going to use the edge selection mode a lot. And so that edge selection is just above the polygons. And the reason we're going to use edge is because we want to grab these sort of vertical bands or vertical divisions that we made, and we want to sort of pull these until we get a curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the edges here on the front. And again, I'm selecting these. You can just click them and then shift click them one at a time. But I would like for you to get in the habit or get used to, just with the selection tool active right here, the circle, you can just glide your mouse along these, and that's a lot quicker. So I'm going to go around to the back, and I'm going to also make sure that I grab these as well. And the reason for that is because, well, it's hard to see from this angle, but I'm willing to bet a decent amount of money that the back of the chair is also curved. So what we'll do is we're going to pull these in the green direction, and we'll see that this is starting to form a shape. Like how we selected these? So right now nothing is selected, and we want to select these by just clicking them. Yeah, so let me just undo a bunch. Actually, let me save real quick. So I'm going to save as, and I'm going to save as a version 2, because there's a question. So each day when I come in, I like to save a different version of my project. So today's the second day we're working on this. So this is going to be the second version of my file. So now I'm going to undo. So your question was, how do we get these at all? So with the cube is currently a primitive still. You have to add segments. In my case, it's X. Your chair might be different, but you have to add these before. Yeah, let me. So you're gonna have to undo because right now it's editable. It's no longer a cube. So you're gonna undo. So, alright, now that it's back to a cube, you can select it, and then go to Object. And so, in one of these cases, you're going to have to add segments. So it's probably X as well. That's like the way that yours curves. So, segments X. So you can click the arrow to add more. You can see that these are starting to make. Alright. Alright, let's jump back into this. So I'm going to just revert my file. So don't pay too much attention to this if you're just watching. Okay, so now that we've got those selected there and these selected here, we're going to do that again. So we're going to pull these backwards in the green direction to start to make this curve. So with nothing selected, you want to hit spacebar until you see the circle on your mouse. If you do not see a circle on your mouse, you want to make sure this radius value is set to 10 if you're listening to the recording. So with this circle on your mouse visible, you want to just left click and drag along these to highlight them orange. Or if that's too complicated, you can just hold shift and just click these one at a time until they all turn orange. So we're going to pull these in the green direction. And what I need to do to make this curve sort of round is I need to pull these incrementally each way. So what I mean by that is I pulled all of these a little bit to make the start of the curve. Now what I need to do is I need to unselect the far edges. So to do that, I'm going to hold Control and just click off those on the side there, and these on the side here. And now I'm going to pull backwards on the green direction a little bit more, and you'll see that starting to make more of a curve. So again, I'm just going to deselect the sides and the sides on the back. Now pull this a little bit further, and I've made a nice neat curve now. Awesome. So one thing I'll notice is there's a little bit of a gap here where the seat and the back are no longer meeting. And the reason for that is because obviously we pulled these edges on the back away from the seat. So what I need to do now is on the seat is I need to basically do the same process where I need to add divisions. And in this case, it's most likely going to be the same direction. want to suggest that we do, at least for the time being, is there might be a little bit more detail or adjustments that we want to make to this arm. You know, I might decide that I want to sort of tweak it a little bit. I'm not 100% happy with how this is going to curve sort of along this inside piece. I think I might need to make it a little bit bigger. So if we just copy and paste this, and then bring this one over, now it's pointing the wrong way. We can flip it pretty easily if we just select this arm 2, and we select it and we go to its coordinates. Does anyone have a guess as to how we can flip this? Yeah, so I heard it quietly, but we can scale it. So if we scale it sort of reverse, kind of make it go inside out, you know, like if you have like a layer in Photoshop and you're using like the free transform tool or whatever, and you grab it from one side and you swing it like all the way over, you can basically flip the image. We can do that same idea, and so we want to figure out which of the X, Y, or Z scales we want to flip it on, and in this case it's the red direction, and we know the red direction is X. If we check the little axis down here in the bottom corner, so I can punch in -1 scale on X, and we see that we just made the flipped version of this. So that's cool, right? But remember how I said I wasn't super happy with how this curve looks? So if I go in here, let's say my boss, you know, I'm at work and my boss is like, hey, we need you to model this chair, and it takes me all day long to model this chair. Let's just, in this hypothetical situation, and then at the end of the day I'm like, okay, cool, I finished the chair, Mr. Boss, do you like it? And he's like, no, you need to fix the curvature on that arm right now, like right now, otherwise you can't go home. And so then I, you know, go back to my desk all upset, and I edit the way this curve looks. So let me just pretend that I do that real quick. Cool. So let's say that that took a lot longer than it did, and now I go back to my boss and I'm like, hey, I fixed the curve. He's like, cool, awesome. Well, you fixed one of them, not both of them. So now I gotta go do all that work all over again on this other one, right? No. So I see someone shaking their head no. The person who is shaking their head no is correct. What we can do, instead of copy and pasting this, we can use what is called an instance. And I think that actually is, nope, ignore that. Not on the definition sheet, but it should be. An instance is basically a copy of something, kind of like a smart object in Photoshop, in that if you update the original, it will update the duplicate. Or if you change, I should say, if you change the original, it will update whatever those changes, whatever you did to it. So we want to delete that second arm because it was just a copy. It wasn't an instance. So we can make an instance of this arm so that we'll have a second arm that is a live copy, and we can do that by clicking and holding on this second green button and moving our mouse over to instance, and we'll see that I've created an arm1 instance. Now if I go to its object tab and we see the reference object here, we want to make sure that it says arm1 right here. If you're doing it, if you're following along on the video or whatever and this isn't quite right, then just start over, kind of try to make it again. You want to make sure that when you make the instance, you have the object you want selected when you do it. So that's all good. We can now name this arm2. We can do that same concept where we move it over and then we scale it, in this case -1 on the X direction, kind of line it up into place. So that looks pretty good. So now, when I go back and I make a change to the arm number 1, let's say I go here and I edit. Let me just do something really, really drastically obvious. Let's just say I grab this and I raise it up. We see that it's raising both arms up. So that's cool. That means that we do half the work and not all the work. So again, thinking smarter, not harder. So let's move on to the legs. These shouldn't take us too long because it's just a series of very, very basic cubes. Yeah, we'll go over how to make an office chair kind of thing afterwards. So we've got our arms. Let me just get these grouped up a little bit. So this way we've got the seat. We can raise the seat up. Cool. So let's just start with, I guess, this front left leg. Now this will be pretty easy. We just shrink the width and depth quite a bit. Leave the height pretty tall. Move that over this way and then up. So in my case, the legs look like they sit relatively or completely flush with the front and side of the seat. So what I mean by that is when I'm moving this, I want to make sure that it's lined up very, very closely. It's not like overhanging like this. This is not, in my case, accurate to the way that this is sort of put together. So I want to line this up so that this sits as flush as I can make it. And it looks like the front leg is probably rotated ever so slightly forward, probably just for balance reasons. So we're just going to move that a little tiny bit. And we'll name this leg 1. And then make a copy of it. Or no, we're going to make an instance of it because we're super smart. We might need to make changes to this later. So call this leg 2. And line this up. Now let's go back to the front, or sorry, let's go move on to the rear legs now. One thing I want to point out in my case is it looks like the direction, this direction is a little bit thicker. It's sort of probably just because when you're sitting in a chair, most of your weight, or the kind of the center of gravity is further back. So this back leg is probably a little bit thicker for structural stability reasons so that you don't break the chair. So when we make this copy and we rotate it back the other direction so that it points backwards now, we now have to make this leg editable. So we're going to call that leg 3, make it editable. And the reason for that is because we want to grab this edge that is currently hidden. We can't see it because everything else is in the way. So what I'm going to do is, just like in Photoshop, if you're working with like a really complex stack of layers, you can Alt or Option click the eyeball to like solo or isolate one layer at a time. You can do that same thing in Cinema, by clicking on this S button over here on the left side of the viewport. This is the solo button. So if I click and hold and I go to solo single, now the only thing I can see is this leg, which is good because I want to grab that one edge right there, and I can turn that back off by just clicking and holding on it. And now with the edge here that's sort of hidden, I can just move this way. And now I've made this side, the upper portion thicker, which matches the profile of this leg a little bit more accurately. One thing I do notice is now the bottom of the foot, or the bottom of the leg, is now not flat. So I'm going to jump to my side camera, which is in this case the lower left camera, and I'm going to raise this up until this looks a little bit more straight. Cool. Looking pretty good. So now I can make an instance of this leg to move over to this side. Call this leg 4. Move that over there. And now it looks like the only piece of modeling that's missing are the beams right here that connect the front and the front and rear of each side of the legs. So that should be pretty easy to put together as well. I'm just going to take this one and control drag it to make a copy. Bring that one down there. Sort of rotate it a bit. Jump back to my side camera, try to line this up as accurately as I can. So it looks like this leg right here is a little bit too long. So I'm going to make that editable. Jump back to this camera and grab that edge, bring it up a little bit. Sort of just line it up, because these look like these connect pretty closely. Cool, that looks pretty good. Instance this, call this leg right beam, pull that over here. And we should be all good on modeling now. Looks pretty close. Now I think the last, sorry, I said these beams were the last thing, but there's probably little like rubber feet or like little cylinders that serve as feet under each of these legs. So I'm just going to make those super duper quick with teeny tiny cylinders. So I'm just going to call that foot 1, and I'm going to make this foot a child of leg 1, which should hopefully, if I've been using instances correctly, it now copied over to there. And then if I make another one, so now I want to make another foot a child of, in this case, leg 3. So what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to control drag in the objects list. So hold control, drag foot 1, and I'm going to drag another one up until I see the downwards arrow points on leg 3. So now that I've got a foot 3 as a child of leg 3, I can then move that into position back there. Close enough. And so now we can see that there's a foot right there. So that'll conclude modeling the chair. We're going to take a break in a second once I get these grouped together. So select that, and that, and that. So these are going to be left eggs. And I'm selecting these and then hitting Alt G to group them, and that'll be right legs. So then I'll make these two leg groups a child of the chair seat by just dragging them down into the hierarchy there. And so now I can move the whole chair all around. Sweet. So I'm going to save, and you guys can take a break, regroup at 6:10, where we will we'll texture the chair, and then we'll quickly build the rest of the room. All right.
How do you mirror again?
So to mirror, sorry, let me pause it. All right, so I think we're back from the break. Let's now tackle texturing this chair. So this is a darker shade of wood. So we jump to Google Images and we go back up to the top, and let's look up wood texture. Let's find a darker wood to base our texture off of. Again, I'm going to set my size to large to make sure I get a grab an image that has good resolution to it. So this looks really big. And looks like it'll be close enough, I think. Oh boy, here we go. I haven't seen an image load this slow in 15 years. I'm expecting the dial-up sounds. So we'll save this, and this will be not in reference, but in textures. So this will go there. And we'll jump into Cinema now, and we'll make ourselves a material. We'll call this chair wood material. Again, we want to double click to open it up, and here in the color channel, in the texture slot, we want to load in this new wood image that we have. So we'll make our way to our folder. And that's now loaded up, so we'll close that, and we want to apply this to the chair. So we're going to click and drag. We could drag it onto the object, but I'm just going to drag it onto the list, or in the object list. And that applies our wood material to all that, but it's not looking quite dark enough. I like the grain of this, but I need to adjust the color. Now I could, if you're more comfortable in Photoshop, you could open it up and, use hue and saturation or levels or, any number of tools in Photoshop to adjust the color. But I'm going to try to do it right here in Cinema, just to show us that we can. So here in the texture slot, there's a little arrow right here. I want to make sure I click the arrow. And if you aren't following along exactly to a T, just kind of, I guess, absorb this information. You don't have to do it if it doesn't apply to you. But I'm gonna select layer, and basically what the layer shader is it's effectively a group, like in Photoshop. So if I click into this, we now see it's like we just jumped into a folder, and this folder currently has one layer inside of it, and we can add more layers. In the layers we'll have blending modes, just like Photoshop. So I'm going to add, underneath shader, I'm going to add a color, and currently this color is white. So what I want to do is I want to pull up my image, and I'm going to, just for the purposes of this, I'm going to drag it to my second monitor so that I can color pick it. So I'm going to click this white and change this color, but I don't want to manually do it. I'm just going to use the eyedropper to color pick a relatively dark brown, and then click the back arrow to go back. So right now this color, I'm just going to rename this brown to be super self-explanatory. This brown is on top of or over what this image of the wood grain is, so I'm going to change the blending mode to, I'm just going to do what I do in Photoshop, which is scroll through all of them until something looks right. And I think multiply was probably the best one. Now this looks a little too strong. This chair is like very, very, very dark stained almost. So I'm going to just lower the opacity of that layer a little bit, just so that it's like darker, but it's not completely super mega dark. And that looks pretty close. Okay, so we've got a chair, we've got our desk. Let's turn the traffic lights back on the desk and start building our little scene. So I'm gonna, oopsie daisy, raise this desk up, and I might need to adjust the size of some of these objects because it looks like this chair is way too short now for this desk. But it'll help if I have a floor to sort of use as a reference. So in this case, I'm going to make a plane. It's kind of like how we did on the first day. Name this floor. And I'm just going to scale it up until it's pretty big, kind of big enough to mimic the size of a room. Maybe shrink it a little bit in one direction, who knows. So now I'm just going to jump to my side camera. Now this nice horizontal line that we have will serve as our floor, and we can position these objects a little bit more reasonably. I'm just going to rotate my desk so that it's facing the chair 180 degrees. So I think most people will agree that this desk is too tall now, or the chair is too short. Either way, this would not be a very comfortable place to sit at and work. Your arms would be like, you'd be writing like this, which would not be too productive. So I'm going to jump in, and we're going to shorten the length of these legs a little bit. And I'm going to do that by selecting all of these legs, which are my legs 1, 2, 3, and 4, and go to this Object tab. In the height, 415 centimeters. Let's figure out how big that is in units of freedom. So 415 cm. Just punch that into Google. And if we turn this into inches, 163 inches. So then in feet, that's going to be like 13 feet. Yeah, this desk's a little large. But that's okay. We're just going to eyeball it. There, that's a little bit more reasonable. You would have plenty of room for your legs to fit underneath, and your elbows would sit pretty alright if you were to use this desk to write or type on a keyboard or whatever. So that's fine, I think. Good enough. So let's finish real quick the rest of the room, and then we'll call that a lesson. So typically desks are placed up against the wall, relatively close to the wall. So I'm going to move the floor in this case so that the back of the desk is lined up a little bit closer to that. And I don't need all these segments on my floor, so I'm going to type in 1 and 1. And then I want to make my walls now. That's a pretty reasonable thing to make next. So to do that, we're going to use the Extrude Tool on the floor so that we can lift up walls kind of out of nowhere. So we've got to make our floor editable with C, and then we can grab this. Actually, we're going to grab the edges. So we'll grab these 4 edges, and we'll hit D to extrude, and then we'll click and drag these. Nope. So when I use the Extrude Tool, this is what it wants my walls to do. Now that's not exactly very wall-like, is it? But what we can do is in the Extrude Tool, we have a parameter here called edge angle, and right now it's at 0, so it's basically just telling the edges to go like whatever kind of direction it thinks it wants them to go in. So we're going to override that, and we're going to try to type in 90, and then hit enter, and it looks like that was the right direction. So now we have walls.
Why not just make a cube and then delete the top?
You can do that. The reason I don't want to delete the top of the cube is because I'm going to be inside the room. And so just you wait. Just you wait. So we're going to learn the question, or good point, was what are we doing? Why do we use a floor? Just a good question to ask. What we're going to do is the last tool we're going to learn, or I shouldn't say the last tool, but the next tool we're going to learn today is the Close Polygon Hole tool. And we can find that under our M menu. So remember, we want to hit M, and we don't want to touch the mouse. So if we just tap M and we get this pop-up list, does anyone spot the Close Polygon Hole tool? D, yes. So we'll hit D on our keyboard now, and we can see the little icon on our mouse changed to be something different. So now we're going to create the ceiling to our room by mousing sort of close to one of these corners, and once it lights up, we can click, and now we've made a room. So it's going to be a little tricky to look into our room currently because it's closed off on all sides. So I guess the closest example of like a real world object would be like a dollhouse. And a dollhouse is like a model playhouse that has one whole side of it deleted so that you can look into it and interact with what's inside. So we're going to make our fake little dollhouse kind of scenario, and we're going to do that by selecting, in this case I know it's this polygon, and then we'll just hit delete on our keyboard, and now we can look into this room. So I can, you know, model a bookshelf, put it off to the side, or a bed, a lamp. I can make a poster or a TV, you know, any number of other objects that I want you guys to make. In addition to what we've made here, I would expect one or two more other objects, you know, at least one object of like substance. You know, you can't just make a little cube, or you can't just make like a sphere and say like, oh, I made a ball, and because I have a little ball that sits on my desk. Well, that isn't complicated enough. So for the assignment, you know, make something that, you know, has a little bit of decent time, and it'll reinforce using the knife and extrude tools and other stuff like that, and figure out a way to set it into your room. So I guess what we'll do now is we'll just quickly make some materials for our room, and I'm going to pick boring colors, because I think like a homeowner, in that you should probably paint walls a neutral color, like a white or an off-white, as awesome as having a hot pink painted room would be. It's not always the most realistic situation. So I'm going to select these walls and make a new material, and it's just going to be white, and I'm going to name this walls. Oops, sorry, jumped up on the wrong monitor. So I've got this white material, and I'm going to make it ever so slightly yellow, because it's an off-white. It's not white, it's off-white. And then we'll click and drag this onto the walls there. So those are colored something. And then we'll pick, actually we're going to make a copy of this material. So Control V, or Control C, Control V, name this ceiling, and make this a little bit darker of a shade, just so that there's a little something kind of to the room. And we'll select the ceiling, and then we'll apply this color to the ceiling. I'm going to make that a little bit even more darker, just so that it has an effect, or has an apparent effect. And then we'll figure out some sort of material to make our floor. So carpet is probably realistic. You could do carpet, or you could do like a solid color, or maybe you can find another wood grain. It's kind of up to you, in whatever sort of scenario you've imagined this room to be. So I'm going to go with carpet. So let's search up carpet texture and see what we get. So this red kind of looks like something. So one thing I want to, actually I'm going to do, yeah. So just ignore what I'm doing for 2 seconds. Okay. So let's just say that this is my carpet material that I like. So we're going to save this to the carpet, or to our texture folder, jump to Cinema, make ourselves a carpet material, carpet, not carpet L, and we'll load in this image, and then select our floor, and then apply it to the floor. Sweet, that looks amazing. So everything looks pretty bad because we don't have any lights or anything. So real quick, let's add a light. We're not going to get too fancy, but we've got a light, and we're going to raise it up to the ceiling to kind of mimic an overhead light in our room. And I want to make sure that I aim it downwards. So what I want to do is when I have my rotate tool, I want to pay attention to which direction this blue line, this very minuscule blue line is pointing in, and I want to point that down. So now that's facing down. And when I select my light, I have to remember that I have to turn on shadows. So I want to make sure that both the type and the shadow are both set to area. So now that that's a thing, we can then render. So now that's looking a little bit more like something, kinda, sorta. But this carpet is not looking too hot. It's very large. What?
I said that's some smooth carpet.
It's very smooth. So what we want to do is actually before we do what I think we want to do, is we want to make sure that this carpet is a little bit like kind of finer grained. We've gotten lucky up to this point with the wood grain on the chair and the desk, in that when we render it, kind of like the overall size and feeling of the wood grain looks right. Like this looks like enough wood grain on the chair and the desk, but the carpet looks like the carpet, you know, is magnified a whole bunch. Like the little grains of these fibers are way too large in how they are not stitched, but you know, kind of combined together. So what we want to do is we want to duplicate kind of how much that this is appearing. So right now, by default, all textures come up with a tile of 1 by 1, and I can get to this screen by clicking on my object, and in this case I want to click on my carpet material, or this one right here, and I know which one's which because I've named everything expertly. So I can try 2 by 2. In this, what this did is it's going to make the grain or the overall scale of this carpet look smaller. Now that looks a little bit closer, but not quite there, so I'm going to try 3 by 3. And one thing I'm noticing, I'm not sure how much it's showing up on the projector, so I'm going to do something real quick to exaggerate this point. So I made this really bright, but does anyone notice these lines? So this texture is repeating. Now if you've played a video game that is like relatively low or like kind of crappy graphics, you'll notice you'll notice this a lot. It's called tiling, where the same texture repeats over and over again, and you can see where it's repeating like over and over again. So the reason for that is because this image, whoever uploaded this image, I mean, you know, they might not have done it on purpose, but it is now what we call a tileable texture. Basically, when you put one side of it up against the other side of it, basically as if there's two of them next to each other, you can spot the difference, like that seam where the two of them, you know, where the two of them are butting up against each other. So what we want to do when we are Googling, in this case the carpet texture, is we want to add the word tileable to our search term, and this will yield a result, in this case, that is called seamless carpet texture. And hopefully, if I'm not lying to you, this person has uploaded this image, and it will, once we save it, it will not have that visual sort of artifact or problem to it. So if I load in the tileable carpet texture, we'll see if this person on the internet has completely hosed me or not. I don't know. I can see. I can see the tile right there, but it's not too bad. This one's a lot closer. I can sort of spot the seam, but it's not too bad. So now I think this is a little bit more appropriate for this use case because I won't have those like wacky lines kind of all over my floor. So I just have to adjust the scaling of this one, and that looks pretty good.
Have you tried textures.com?
I have, yeah. So another resource that someone just brought up is a website called textures.com. So this is a pretty awesome website. We'll use it at some point throughout this course. So it's a pretty good idea to jump onto this website, create an account, and what you can do is on this you get like a certain quota per day or per week or whatever of files that you can download. And so if you want to make I don't know, let's say you want to make granite floor because you're super rich and you want to make your room look like you're some awesome some king or something. You could go to floors maybe and find, I don't know, marble or some sort of fancy looking stone or whatever. You can click these, and once you're signed in, you will have options to download these, and you can use like your certain amount of credits per day or whatever to get these textures for free. And these are a little bit more sort of a little bit more usable than most of what you'll find on Google. The couple little trips that I've taken onto Google for this assignment, I've gotten pretty lucky. But sometimes if you're looking for a specific, something very niche, you might not find it on Google, but you'll find it somewhere on the internet that is a little bit more like focused on CG or 3D stuff. So that's a pretty good website to get registered on. So I think that's all I wanted to cover for today. Obviously we've got some more work to do in making this look less craptastic, but we'll pick that up Tuesday. So here I'll stop the lecture.